In June 1999, 26-year-old LaTanya Haggerty dies from a gunshot wound.
Her life should have never been taken away. This young lady should be alive today.
Her untimely death sparks the largest lawsuit the city of Chicago has ever seen.
She said, well, tell them $95 million.
But instead of helping the family heal, the record-breaking payout sparks a family feud.
They denied her what she was entitled to. That was unfortunate because they could have probably been a close family today.
June 4th, 1999. LaTanya Haggerty is shot while on her way home from work in Chicago's South Side. Chicago police calls LaTanya's brother, Maurice Haggerty Jr., to tell him his sister is hurt.
Maurice Jr. was incredibly close to LaTanya. They lived together. He did everything for her in terms of what a big brother would do for a little sister. He was very proud of his sister. You know, I think LaTanya Haggerty was probably one of the best things he had in his life.
Maurice Jr. and his mother, Barbara, rushed to the hospital to be at LaTanya's side.
LaTanya and her mom were the very best of friends. In fact, the mom for LaTanya was sort of young at heart and very young at heart person because of LaTanya. And they were more like sisters in many respects.
When they arrive, Maurice Jr. and mother Barbara learn the horrible truth. LaTanya is dead. She's been shot, and no one can explain why.
I recall the police were not straightforward with answers to the family. They knew they had a bad shooting on their hands, and they were not forthcoming with information about what happened. And I know the family was very frustrated with that.
In fact, she dies before even reaching the hospital. Her family will never see their beloved daughter and sister alive again. LaTanya is survived by her mother Barbara, father Maurice Sr., brother Maurice Jr., and sister Barbara Fry, as well as a half-brother, Stephen Flournoy, on her mother's side. The details of what happened emerge slowly.
Here was a young lady who was a promising young lady, had a promising future, working every day and living a good life, good Christian young lady whom loved her family, and then for her life to be snuffed out.
In 1999, LaTanya Haggerty's life is just getting started. She's recently graduated from Southern Illinois University, and she's newly engaged.
She was probably the star of that family. She was the only one of 3 children who completed college and was probably a person who had big places to go in her life.
The 26-year-old lives with her parents, and she has close relationships with her siblings and friends.
She had a terrific personality. She had tons of friends from all different walks of life, and she was working at that time for the Encyclopedia Britannica, sort of a startup job for her out of college.
No one, not LaTanya, not her family, ever expected that her life would come to a tragic end.
LaTanya seemed like everybody's sister. She was outgoing, well-spoken. She was everybody's favorite aunt, I understand. She was just a great person. She never had any sort of problems in her life.
As the grief-stricken family tries to come to terms with their loss, it is Maurice Jr. who keeps asking the question, why?
He wanted this case investigated thoroughly, fully, and to have all stones unturned, and he was very angry about this.
But what Maurice Jr. discovers as the day goes on only makes him more angry. It was none other than a Chicago police officer who pulled the trigger that killed his baby sister. On June 4th, the day of the shooting, LaTanya gets a ride home from work from her friend, 24-year-old Raymond Smith.
It was like any commute, anybody leaving for work, going home, and for some reason, about on the south side of the city, Raymond Smith's car drew the attention of police.
He stopped to speak with a friend as he was double parked, and a police car came up and told him to get that hunk of junk out of here.
Smith obliges the officers and moves his vehicle. But before he can go one block, the same officers have put their flashing lights on.
They pulled him over and he stopped. And that was the beginning of what would be a series of tragic events.
One of the policemen, Officer Williams, approaches Smith's car.
The officer pulled him over and said, "Put that window down," and he refused to put his window down. And he asked him for his license, and he showed him his license, but through the window.
I said, "Put your window down."
He says, "Put the window down before I break it," whereupon the young man took off running in the car, and they chased him, calling other officers to cut him off at another corner.
For Officer Williams and his partner Daniels, there is no logical reason for Smith to run. Their suspicions are immediately aroused.
I can't get into Raymond Smith's mind, figure out why he drove off. Did he really fear that the police were going to beat him? Did he really fear that this was going to escalate?
And Smith's split-second decision to run is the first in a chain of events that leads to tragedy.
The police sergeant told the officers in pursuit, stop the pursuit.
Yeah, they got out of their vehicles and they were opening fire on the car.
News of LaTanya Haggerty's death is plastered all over the media, and the mourning Haggerty family wants justice. They are not alone in their fight.
There were two killings of people who were almost the same age, who were both college educated, two totally unjustified shootings within a day of one another. And so the climate of the city of Chicago at that time, the people, it was very highly charged, it was very emotional, and it was front page news for weeks.
Chicago is on edge. The tension fueled by the shootings of two ordinary citizens by cops on the same night in unrelated incidents.
You had two African Americans killed within 8 or 9 hours of each other, both during traffic stops, both who were unarmed. Ironically, both were killed by African American police officers. And these officers did not have a history of police brutalities. These officers did not have a history of necessarily doing a lot of things wrong or bad, having a bad background.
Bad background or not, the officers have shot an innocent civilian.
Fundamentally, what happens in the Chicago Police Department is that police officers believe in the code of blue. They stick together on everything. Black officers tend to mimic officers who may be acting out of racial motivations.
Maurice Haggerty Jr. demands that police investigators find out all they can about his sister's death.
Used against blacks.
Police brutality became a real national issue with the Rodney King case. And then Chicago wound up having its own with LaTanya Haggerty. And people were frustrated. They were tired of this lack of sensitivity, this blue versus black, and the attack upon family members, that people began to cry out for justice.
A full police inquiry is launched, and the 4 officers involved, as well as the driver of the car, Ray Smith, testify before a police board.
There was a 6-day police board hearing, run sort of like a criminal hearing, in which witnesses are called and evidence is put on. At the close of that 6-day hearing, a transcript, which was more than 1,000 pages, goes to the 7-member police board. They read the transcript and they determine the fate of the officers.
Maurice Jr. is at the hearings every day. Raymond Smith is called to testify to a packed courtroom. Smith explains why he drove off when officers Daniels and Williams commanded him to stop.
Many young people didn't feel comfortable with officers stopping them because they were harassed.
Well, keep in mind that in the city of Chicago, if you are an African American and you have lived here for some time, you know darn well that there is a relationship between the police department and the black community that is not a good one.
June 4th, 1999. Driver Raymond Smith and passenger LaTanya Haggerty are pursued by Chicago police. A panicked Raymond calls his mother, who is in the hospital, to tell her that he's scared and he's going to try and drive to his father's house. LaTanya Haggerty sits next to him, terrified. The pursuit is heating up.
4 officers in 2 different vehicles were pursuing Ray Smith and LaTanya.
And before long, they're blocked by a passing train. Ray and LaTanya turn their car around. By now, 2 more officers have joined the chase, for a total of 4 officers in pursuit.
LaTanya has no idea why these police are continuing to pursue her. The police officers just got so fixated on Raymond Smith's car, got so fixated on stopping Raymond Smith, they just sort of lost all sort of evidence of where they were, all rationality.
Raymond and LaTanya find themselves cornered just outside of Chicago State University.
At the point at which they reached 95th and Cottage Grove, an intercepting vehicle caused Ray to stop. At that point, the officers exited their vehicles with guns drawn and approached his vehicle from the front.
And they started shooting at Ray Smith's car. They were shooting recklessly at the vehicle for absolutely no reason whatsoever, other than the fact that they were angry that they were pursuing somebody that there was no need for them to pursue.
Ray, being afraid again, put his car in reverse and speeded away from them, during which they fired a volley of shots at his car, striking his car indeed. Of course, it put other people in danger who may have been in the line of fire. Fortunately, no one was struck, just the vehicle.
At that point, there was a sergeant who was listening to the pursuit. And as they got back into their vehicles, as Ray Smith continued now going northbound to try to get away from these officers who were shooting at him, and the officer said, if they're wanted for traffic, terminate the pursuit. And these young officers said 10-4.
10-4.
They nonetheless continued the pursuit in violation of police practices and police general orders.
Ray and LaTanya head off at full speed. About 6 minutes later, Smith pulls over in front of the Chicago Crusader.
He went and drove to 64th and Cottage Grove, where his uncle John Smith owned a small community newspaper.
Raymond Smith was in fear for his life, thought the police were going to kill him or something would happen to him, so he was trying to get a witness, trying to get somebody else involved, somebody could help him.
But the officers are right behind him.
The police officers jumped out of their car, went over to the driver's side of Raymond Smith's car and began to wrestle with him and pull him out of the car. LaTanya Haggerty is in the front seat passenger on a cell phone.
When the policeman grabbed him, forcibly took him out of the car and took him to the ground.
Please stop! Stop!
Smith doesn't fight back as both officers Williams and Carter punch and kick him.
The one whom originally stopped him was a very tall, muscular officer, a professional boxer with the police league. Raymond was a very slender young man. He was tall, kind of slinky kind of a fella. And so there was already some tension, some concern, and especially for young people who have never been experienced that type of situation.
But the situation is only about to get worse.
A police officer by the name of Serena Daniels is at the rear of the car and has her gun pulled. Her gun is trained on LaTanya Haggerty. LaTanya's getting in the front seats.
Officer Daniels yells to LaTanya from the driver's side of the car.
Get out of the car and put your hands up.
LaTanya stays in the car. Someone fires a gun. Raymond hears the shot while being held forcibly on the ground. He tries to look up and see what is happening.
It was the classic oh shit moment. I've made a mistake.
It's the moment everyone has been waiting for, especially the Haggerty family. The officers involved take the stand to explain what ultimately led Serena Daniels to shoot and kill 26-year-old LaTanya Haggerty.
And it was just very charged. There were people, LaTanya Haggerty's family was there, the Fraternal Order of Police was there, officers in support of the officers who were on trial at this police board hearing were there.
As the details of the day emerge, the Haggerty family looks on with a growing sense of sadness and frustration. Forensic details explain exactly how the young woman died.
Yeah, the shot came from the driver's side of the vehicle. It went through the rear driver's window in a diagonal fashion and went from an upward direction to a slightly downward direction through LaTanya's shoulder into her heart.
But that doesn't explain why LaTanya was shot. What caused in those few seconds Officer Daniels to take the life of a young woman who had not even been charged with a crime?
For the police officer, their position has been Raymond Smith. He's the reason LaTanya Haggerty's dead. All he had to do was stop, not keep driving. Wind his window down, hand his card over to Officer Mike Williams, and none of this would have happened. That's their position.
Despite the fact that they had been ordered to terminate the pursuit, and despite the fact that they acknowledged receiving that order, they were highly emotional, they were highly charged, they abandoned the training they received, and they were using excessive force.
All eyes are on Officer Serena Daniels as she takes the stand.
It was a very emotional day when Officer Daniels took the stand. She was crying. She was very remorseful over LaTanya Haggerty's death. And it was the first time publicly that Serena Daniels gave her side of what happened.
She shot, and she said, the reason I shot is because there was crackled glass there, and I couldn't tell what LaTanya Haggerty had in her hand. I thought it was a weapon.
At some point, Serena Daniels thinks she sees a silver object, thinks LaTanya Haggerty has a gun, when in reality, LaTanya Haggerty has no gun. She's unarmed.
Officer Daniels is booed and hissed at in the packed courtroom. It is obvious to everyone that the preceding days have taken a tremendous toll on her. Her version differs from others who were there.
There were some witnesses there. Obviously, the area at 64th and King Drive in the city of Chicago, at that time of the day, that evening, in June, there are people out and about. It is a busy area. There was a crowd around the car. There's a public housing project right across the street from there.
There were people who saw what happened. Certainly, I remember some of the conversation that was going on of what might have happened. The first rumor was that she had a lock in her hand. The next rumor was that it was a gun, but certainly it was neither one. It was a cell phone. They shot her for a cell phone.
Officer Daniels' testimony is both heartrending and devastating. But parts of her account become suspect as further evidence is revealed.
It turns out that John Smith, Ray Smith's uncle, had taken a photograph of the vehicle after the shooting that showed that there was no crackling glass through the windshield. During the police board hearing, the reason they were able to come up with that story is the only pictures they had were by the forensic police department doing an investigation. By the time they arrived at the scene, the glass had crackled from the gunshot.
There are people who think she still belongs on the force, that Serena Daniels rightfully feared for her life. She did see this silver movement in the front seat of the car while her partners are violently wrestling with the driver, and she fired because she thought she was about to be shot at.
The officers at the scene have no idea who the people in the car are or why LaTanya and Ray are running from the police.
When she discharged her weapon, the first words that came out of her mouth were, "Oh shit." And we know from common experience when we use that expression, an accident just happened.
But for those close to LaTanya, Serena Daniels' words confirm what they already know. LaTanya was unarmed.
So as soon as she shot that weapon, she knew she didn't mean to do it, but the adrenaline took over her mind and took over her body, and she shot and killed an innocent person.
Officer Daniels testifies to holding Haggerty in her arms as the young woman dies.
She was obviously in shock, and then her human emotions took over, and she went over and cradled her and was looking at her and was obviously in shock at what she had just done.
When something reaches this proportion, it's never just one mistake. It's always a series of mistakes. If you take care of the little things, then the big things take care of themselves, and every little thing that went wrong and ended up in a big thing, a person dead.
At the end of their deliberations in March of 2000, the police board determines that all 4 officers involved should be fired. Just over a year later, in June of 2001, civil courts decide 3 of the officers should be reinstated, but not Serena Daniels, the shooter. Maurice Jr. launches a lawsuit against the city for the wrongful death of his sister. He enlists heavyweights Johnny Cochran and James Montgomery and their firm.
When I first met the family and spoke with Barbara Haggerty, the mom, basically we were pretty well convinced that this was a case that we could successfully prosecute. And obviously they were very concerned about getting justice. When I was asked to make a demand by the city, I met with the Haggerty family, and I basically said that, this is a case that the city will likely settle for some substantial money, but they've asked us to make a demand.
But for LaTanya's family, this means that they now had to try to place a dollar value on the loss they experienced when LaTanya died.
There was no amount of money that was relevant to LaTanya's mom or dad, or to her brother, Maurice Jr., or to the sister, Barbara. Money was not of any relevance whatsoever and never came up in any discussions for a long, long time.
The Haggertys are advised that taking the case through the courts would be a long and traumatic affair for the family. it is recommended that they try to settle with the city out of court. But LaTanya's mother, Barbara Haggerty, isn't willing to budge so easily.
She says, well, I'm sorry, I just want justice. I said, well, Barbara, you got to do something. You got to ask them first. I just give me a number. She said, well, tell them $95 million. I said, Barbara, that number will not be conducive to a settlement.
Despite the city's seeming willingness to settle on a sum, the family continues to push for a much larger number.
I got a call basically saying, you've not made a demand. We can put $7.5 million on the table, but we've got more. I said, well, I must tell you that, Mrs. Haggerty asked me to make a demand of $95 million. I declined to do that because I didn't think it would be conducive to a settlement. But again, I think you're going to have to come a long way in order to get this matter settled.
The city cannot afford to have this case go to trial, both because of the damage it would do to Chicago's reputation and because of the cost.
The city knew what their mock juries had told them that if this does go to trial, you're going to pay a lot more than $18 million, and the city decided to settle it.
I think the city of Chicago wanted to settle this case for several reasons, but the biggest reason is that they couldn't admit liability because Serena Daniels was not going to admit that she shot LaTanya Haggerty unjustifiably because she was facing potential criminal charges if she did.
In July of 2000, the Haggertys are finally awarded $18 million, a record amount.
Money cannot replace the life of LaTanya Haggerty or any life, whether it's 18 million, whether it's 100 million. And I think that what is the most important thing is that it brings accountability to government. It brings consciousness to the rank and file of officers that are on the force that there is something going to happen.
But when the settlement goes to probate, there's a hitch. To everyone's surprise, an unexpected claimant arrives on the scene.
Sharon Rock was somebody who basically came out of nowhere once the settlement was announced in terms of wanting money.
26-year-old LaTanya Haggerty's untimely death leaves her family emotionally broken. The Haggerty's $18 million settlement is divided between LaTanya's parents, her brother Maurice Jr., her sister, and LaTanya's half-brother on her mother's side, Steve Flournoy. The law firm gets a third. But their battle for justice triggers yet another emotional legal feud when an unexpected claimant arrives to collect her share. Sharon Rock, LaTanya's half-sister through another mother, lives in Texas, miles away from the Haggerty family in Chicago. Estranged from her family, Rock hears about the settlement at the same time as the rest of the country on the 10 o'clock news.
They let her in and then they pushed her out. They should have included everyone, all family members, in the settlement. Instead, they denied her what she was entitled to. That was unfortunate because they could have probably been a close family today.
I did not know LaTanya Haggerty had a half-sister. I covered this case for several years as it began from 1999 into 2001 into 2002, for 3 years, and I never bumped into her, never talked to her.
Sharon Rock was LaTanya's oldest sister. Sharon was raised in a different household from LaTanya. Sharon was born in Texas. They were related through their father, Maurice Haggerty Sr. Sharon was born outside of wedlock as the child of Maurice Haggerty Sr. and her mother.
After Sharon was born, Maurice Haggerty Sr. married Barbara and had another set of children, including LaTanya, the baby.
Sharon found out that she even had a natural father when she was about 10 or 11 years old. So she didn't know up until then. She met LaTanya for the first time about 2 or 3 summers before she was shot.
But the Haggertys are not so quick to welcome Sharon into their lives, and one expensive question remains. If Sharon Rock is actually entitled to a share of the $18 million, why wasn't she at LaTanya's funeral? On the night of LaTanya's death, Sharon is called by a family member at home. But in the days that follow, she is oddly not given any information.
Sharon Rock was somebody who basically came out of nowhere once the settlement was announced in terms of wanting money. Here's somebody who didn't even attend LaTanya's funeral.
Sharon definitely wanted to go to the funeral. She did everything in her power to contact family members so she could get information regarding it, and it just wasn't forthcoming.
She decides to send flowers.
When she contacted the florist, she asked the florist, just by chance, if he knew anything about LaTanya Haggerty's funeral.
In a lucky break for Rock, the florist does not know where LaTanya's body is resting and delivers flowers on Sharon's behalf. But Sharon still doesn't know any more details about the service. Days pass. Sharon never gets a response from the Haggertys.
She finally was able to speak with someone, I believe it was Tuesday or Wednesday of the following week. She had called the Monday and left a message with someone who was answering the phone for her sister Barbara Fry. And she asked that Barbara Fry please contact her regarding LaTanya's funeral arrangements. She never received a call back.
Sharon wonders why no one has been in touch about the funeral.
Maurice Haggerty did not believe the stepsister played any role in LaTanya's life, was not a factor in her life, was not emotionally invested in LaTanya's life. That I believe he felt she was opportunistic.
The only explanation I could find is that perhaps LaTanya's parents had a change of heart about her.
I will say that Maurice Sr. was indicating that this lady was not his daughter. And for whatever reason, I can't say. I can't say it had to do with money, because Maurice Sr. was not someone who was really that concerned about money. He had lived a decent life, worked life, and had supported his family well.
After her half-sister's tragic death, Rock is contacted by attorney Thomas Marzewski for her permission to make Maurice Jr. the independent representative of the estate.
Yeah, Sharon Rock was contacted by me at the very beginning of this litigation because she was listed as a next of kin in the affidavit, and therefore she's entitled to notice of a representative of an estate where she's a next of kin. And I provided her with a technical waiver of notice, which essentially means, yes, I know about this case, and I agree to him being the representative. You don't have to give me formal notice, so to speak.
He also sent her a waiver of any rights in some of the personal property that LaTanya Haggerty had. So if he didn't believe that she was LaTanya's sister, I just don't see why he would have bothered to do that.
Well, I was just a little surprised that Sharon Rock was claiming to be interested in part of the settlement proceeds from LaTanya Haggerty's wrongful death settlement because she didn't have an established relationship with LaTanya Haggerty.
Rock signs the paperwork for the Haggertys and faxes it back to Thomas Marzewski. No questions asked. But as time passes, she does not hear from them again.
You know, two things. We are lawyers who respond to the information that's provided to us by our client. And obviously, for whatever reason, Maurice Haggerty Sr. Indicated that the child was not his. And obviously, that's the position that we took in the litigation.
In cases where there is a dispute over money within the family, it's pretty rare. But when it does happen, it's usually because either dad was a runaway dad, didn't care for a child at all, and it's a child who died, didn't support the child, or some point where somebody is estranged, whether it be a parent or a brother and sister or somebody that they didn't have a relationship with.
Once news of the settlement breaks, Sharon tries to make contact with the family again. To some, her motives are suspicious.
I did not see her in court. I did not see her at the police board hearings. Maurice was fighting the fight for his sister.
They see that there's a large chunk of money, and they decide they want some of it, and so they find representation and request part of the division of the proceeds.
According to Rock, her relationship with LaTanya stemmed from a phone call that Rock placed to her father, Maurice Sr.
When she was an adult, that's when she decided she wanted to know him, and she attempted to make contact with him.
Maurice Sr. put little LaTanya on the phone.
Sharon and LaTanya spoke probably for the first time when LaTanya was a little girl, about 6 or so. LaTanya told Sharon when she was little that when she grew up, she was going to come and visit her. And that's exactly what she did. When she was about 23 or 24, she took a trip to Texas and she came and stayed with Sharon. They went shopping and did other things together, the movies, things like that.
While Sharon's relationship with the rest of her family does not develop, she claims her connection with her little sister, LaTanya, is strong.
Sharon basically claimed that she had engaged in many telephone calls to her father, that after she had met LaTanya, that she had called LaTanya on the phone and talked to her a number of times. And of course, that was something that we couldn't verify, and so we had telephone records produced that didn't reflect that there was the kind of calls that she had referred to.
Sharon's daughter Moshe and LaTanya hit it off immediately. Moshe really liked LaTanya, and LaTanya loved her. And Moshe had plans to come to Chicago and visit with LaTanya and stay with her the following summer.
But they never get to see each other again. LaTanya is killed earlier that same summer.
The type of things that we do to establish relationships with people happens on a daily and a weekly basis, not a one-time visit and talking about the would have and could haves in the future.
Back in Texas, Sharon Rock continues to wait, but a return call from the Haggertys never comes. When she does not hear anything concerning the settlement from her half-brother, she decides to contact attorney Diane Ainsworth.
Well, initially, I explored the possibility with Sharon of a settlement. I thought maybe there was some mistake in the paperwork. I pulled the probate court file and I saw that her name was included on the initial petition as an heir. And so I thought maybe it would be possible to contact the Haggerty's lawyers and see if they would correct that.
When it comes to wrongful death cases, in the state of Illinois, The mom and dad of a decedent, when there is no husband and there is no children, so the decedent is left with parents and siblings, there's a presumption that the mom and the dad have had a loss. Brothers and sisters do not have a presumption of loss. They have to prove a loss unless the whole family can agree to what a distribution should be.
But the explanation that Diane was given was that the probate court judge had removed Sharon Rock from the heirship petition.
When I realized that they had decided that they weren't going to make any offer and they were going to fight about it, then I doubted the veracity of that explanation. And then it occurred to me that maybe it was because of something that Ms. Haggerty said in her deposition. And she said that Sharon told her that she was born in 1956. Now, the Haggertys were married in 1956.
According to the Haggertys' lawyers, a judge ruled that because LaTanya and Sharon shared a father and not a mother, the judge found that Sharon was not eligible to inherit, even though LaTanya's half-brother Steve, on her mother's side, received an equal share.
I think it explains itself. Theoretically, if the mother is the common parent, then obviously they're all half of the half-blood. On the other hand, if the father is the parent, he can only be the parent of one and not of all. So there you are.
That was an intriguing assertion by the Haggertys' attorneys.
In other words, there's no doubt who the mother is, but the father can be in question.
I saw the affidavit of their attorneys, and they were relying on that section in denying Sharon's admission as an heir to that estate. Unfortunately, that's not the applicable law.
For Diane Ainsworth, it appears that someone has not done their homework. The fact that there was a half-brother who had been included seemed to suggest that they had legitimate grounds to appeal this decision.
He received his share of the settlement. No one contested his relationship to LaTanya, and he stated in his deposition that he grew up in Texas. He was raised by his grandparents. He did not grow up in the Haggerty household.
LaTanya's half-brother Stephen was a very close member of the family who visited Chicago on a regular basis and who received visits from family members over the years. So there was no question in anybody's mind or in their relationship but that he was a genuine half-brother to Maurice Jr. and Barbara.
It's just the way things happen sometimes. I mean, some people have a closer relationship with their family members than others. That's true of almost all families.
Sharon's attorney, Diane Ainsworth, wonders if there might be some other factor at the heart of this battle. Another reason why the family wants to keep Sharon out of the $18 million and removed from the Haggerty circle.
Why wasn't Sharon included? I know that Maurice Jr. Had stated in his deposition, he made some vague allusion that Maurice Sr. might have had other children. I don't know.
A theory Ainsworth holds is that Barbara Haggerty mistook the year of Rock's birth, erroneously believing Sharon was conceived during her marriage, making either Sharon a fraud or Maurice Sr. unfaithful.
I think that the real motivation behind Sharon's desire to fight in this case was really born out of a desire to be respected, to be recognized, to be acknowledged by her father and her other family members.
After an emotionally exhausting battle inside and outside of the courtroom, in November of 2002, Sharon Rock and attorney Diane Ainsworth finally win their suit against the rest of the Haggertys, and Sharon is awarded a small percentage of the settlement.
The judge took into account the limited relationship that existed between LaTanya and Sharon, and gave her an amount of money that he felt was reasonable and fair in relation to the total proceeds from the settlement.
Well, I think that a 5% settlement distribution sounds small as 5%, but this was a division of approximately $12 million. So it turned out that somebody got about $600,000 for one visit to Texas.
The half-sister's relationship with the Haggerty family is more strained than ever before. Still, Sharon Rock keeps trying to connect with them.
I think Maurice was not unsympathetic to Sharon. Maurice was, following the bidding of his father. And I think that if he had his way, there would not have been any issues or contests over the money.
What the settlement did for Sharon, it said to her, you know what? I do count. I am a part of this family, even if there are some amongst the family who don't want to accept me.
Eventually, Sharon does speak with her father, Maurice Sr., again, and in 2005, she makes plans to visit him. But Sharon's plans are delayed, and her estranged father dies the week she is supposed to be there. Sharon Rock is not listed in her father, Maurice Haggerty Sr.'s obituary. Sharon does not inquire into her father's will, and the Haggertys do not contact her about it either.
LaTanya represented something very special to Sharon. LaTanya was really the key, the glue to the other side of her family, the family that she didn't know.
A young woman whose absence will never be filled by an $18 million settlement that only served to further tear her family apart.
I think that many times people want some public vindication in a trial, and I think that's what Barbara Haggerty had in mind. And I think that, you can never get your child back, and it was pretty clear that from our perspective that the only justice that she could reasonably expect would be in terms of getting paid for the loss of the society and companionship of that daughter.
In a strange way, it seems that the legacy of LaTanya Haggerty has been a foundation for change as it relates to racial profiling, police brutality.
It will take the city of Chicago a long time to recover from this shameful exposure of the racial tensions and police brutality that haunt it. A ghost that proves difficult to vanquish, the remainder of a crime that should have never taken place.
Many people give reference to her case, and I believe that we now can see that her life was not in vain, but it was used in order to help thousands of others to receive justice.